can't believe how many of you asked me so many amazing and sweet questions. They really made me smile looking at them. About bread, about your starter, about my house, and definitely some things about the pets later in the video. You're the real highlight, aren't you? Okay, let's talk about all things bread. First question is, what was your first sourdough loaf like? My first loaf was not pretty. It was like a bit ugly. I cut it with a Stanley knife, and I remember being like, how the hell do I shape this? And just being really like confused about every step of the process. I remember being like, which way does it go, and where's the top, and how do you make it into a ball, and just, yeah, being so confused. So the first loaf, despite my confusion, tasted really good. I didn't make my own starter. I got starter from someone else, and I think that was for me maybe the key to it just working. Like, if you can find a starter that is really healthy and happy and use it, I believe that it is quite hard to make a bad loaf of bread. Like, most of the time, a good starter, even if you haven't timed the feeding quite right, like there's a lot of stuff you can do wrong, but if your starter's good, you will get good bread. Like, it's hard to make really bad bread with a good starter. So most of the time, if your bread isn't good, it's your starter that's the problem. Oh, hello. Oh, it's my friend. I really liked this, is like, why? Why do people want to get the ear? I guess the ear is like a symbol of that you've done a good job of proofing your dough. Oh, Ben, you're so happy. The ear comes when you've let the dough develop to just the right amount of time that you can shape it and build a good amount of tension. And so then you get this kind of exaggerated spring when you bake the loaf. I have some videos on my Instagram stories of the full process of bread. Look at the part where I score them and you can see the little angle, and it's just like a quick cut. But yeah, it's not just the way you cut it, like it's also the way you shape so that there's enough tension and that you get the proofing right so that there's enough sort of expansion when you bake the loaf that it all comes together to create the ear. So there's like a lot of little factors coming together, which is why people, I think, get really excited when they get an ear, because it's like a little reward for getting your guesses about your loaf right. There were some questions about how to bake without a Dutch oven. Personally, I love the Dutch oven. I have 2 Dutch ovens. Actually, I have more, but I have 2 that I use most frequently. One is Lodge Combo Cooker, and it's great. It's my favorite, and you can use it for cooking other stuff. I have a second Dutch oven from Kmart. It was $30. So like, you don't have to get like a Le Creuset one or whatever. IKEA have them too. Like, get whatever one you can get. It doesn't have to be fancy, but it will totally be a huge game changer for your bread. The next best thing, if you can't get a Dutch oven for whatever reason, is a bread tin. So you can basically use a bread tin like a Dutch oven. Just get one that has a lid. And you can use the same process, like exactly the same step by step for the tin as the Dutch oven. A question about weather that I thought was really interesting and might be helpful for some people. I live in Brisbane, and recently my bread has been turning out flat with no ear. My dough is wet. I think this is happening because it's hot and humid in Brisbane. If you keep your starter out of the fridge, you can have something called acid buildup, where basically your starter keeps getting hungry and more of that liquid on top comes. Acid buildup stops your loaf from developing properly and rising properly, and that happened to me the first summer that I was baking bread. I'm gonna go up here. I would recommend in summer keeping the starter in the fridge, and then you won't have to keep feeding it like 3 times a day. If your bread is a pancake, a frisbee, if it's really sticky, you can't shape it, it's probably overproofed, and it could be a combination of your starter having too much acid in it to begin with, that your dough can't actually develop properly in the first place, and or that you've left the bread out for too long. It's like in humid weather, it happens so fast, like maybe 3 or 4 hours, it's enough. Don't be afraid if it's feeling bubbly to really cut back on the proofing time of your bread when it's humid and like above 25 degrees. It doesn't even have to be that hot. Like if it's humid, I don't know, the yeast just really likes it and multiplies really quickly. About your starter. The first question is, what flour should you feed your starter with? Like, does it matter if it's baker's flour or if it's plain flour? I just feed my starter with like whatever I've got. It's often baker's flour, it's sometimes wholemeal flour, it's sometimes rye flour, it's sometimes fresh, it's sometimes not. Flour is food for your starter. So whatever flour you give it, it's going to be happy that you've fed it. There were some questions because I keep my starter in the fridge and it stays bubbly, and so there were a few questions about like how this works. I feed it when I make a loaf of bread. So like I use basically most of what's in the jar to make a loaf of bread, or however many loaves I'm going to make. I use most of what's in the jar, and then with what's left in the jar, just a little bit, I feed that little bit, and then I let it rise together with the bread, and I usually let it get to peak. Also, peak is a conspiracy. You can never really know what the peak was unless you let it go past the peak. So I say like just wait until it looks really bubbly, or it's risen, or like done something. Like you're never going to know exactly if that was the maximum or not, and in my opinion it doesn't really matter. You're still going to get a nice loaf of bread if you use your starter when it's bubbly. So feed it, let it rise. When it's bubbly, whenever along the process, you know, plus minus a few hours, put it in the fridge. So it's usually the time that my dough's ready, is the starter's also ready, and I just use it for my bread. I don't feed it, I just use it straight from the fridge, and like all the bread that you see that I make, that's how I make it, and it works. But I do think it has something to do with how your fridge is. Usually for me, it stays bubbly. I think this is because my fridge is cold. So when I was in Europe, I noticed the fridges there are set to warmer. I don't know how warm, like maybe 6 degrees. And my fridge is set to 4 degrees. And I think it's actually maybe even colder in the fridge, or in some parts of the fridge. So if you're finding that your starter is falling after you put it in the fridge, it will always fall a little bit. But like if it's getting like hooch on top, then you could try turning down your fridge, the temperature of your fridge, so it's a bit colder in your fridge, and you might notice a difference, hopefully. And the same goes for my loaves of bread. So I'm able to make dough and leave the dough in the fridge for days, I think because my fridge is just set to quite cold, so not much fermentation happens, and all that really happens is it gets more sour, which I like. Some questions about me. Have you gotten settled into your new house? It's really nice to finally have unpacked everything. I just moved house. Unwillingly, my lease ended on my current rental, and so I needed to move. But it's really nice to be in a new place. We have more space, we have a backyard, and I will give you a little tour at the end. And someone asked how my plants are holding up, because the plants always hate moving house, and you can see they're actually really happy in here, and I'll show you some more of them in the tour. Another question, what will you do now you've finished your degree? And relatedly, is Mary Grace Bread your full-time job? Do you do bread full-time? I feel like I do bread full-time, but technically I don't. My day job is that I'm actually a teacher. I teach English as a second language, and I really love doing that. And I think that's helped me teach bread in this weird way. Learning bread is like learning a new language in a way. And so my approach has been to take back a lot of those like technical terms that are really just for describing something that's very kind of simple and everyday. So I try to switch between the bread language and the everyday language, and I feel like hopefully it starts to make a little bit more sense. So yeah, I work part-time as a teacher, and the rest of the time I do the bread Instagram. And do I make a livable income off my Instagram account? The way that I'm able to make money that makes it more possible for me to invest more time in creating content is through my recipe book, which is Live, Laugh, Loaf. Every time I say that name I'm like, haha. But it's a book that I've made 100% myself. It has drawings from me, all the recipes. It's a big Word document that I keep adding things to, and that is at the moment the only way that I make money from my account. But it's been amazing to see so many people so excited to learn about baking bread and give me, I don't know, show me the loaves that they make from my recipes, and just to be able to share that thing that I've made that is so many of like my thoughts about bread and ideas and ways of doing things that kind of go against the rules a little bit, but like they work for me, so I think they could work for you too. So I guess it's like I'm really busy, I have lots of other things to do, and I just want to keep making bread, and I love giving the bread to people. So like I give loaves to my friends sometimes, my parents, just whoever I can think of that it's like they might want one of my loaves, I will give one to them, or who haven't I made one for a while, and I just put them in my friends' letterboxes as a little surprise. In a way, I love giving it away more than I love making it for myself, but I do also really enjoy eating the bread that I make, so that's where it goes. Yeah, and okay, to come back to the original question of what I'm going to do, so I have a PhD in languages, in German. My PhD thesis was about language learning, and now it's done. I don't really know what I'm going to do. I hope that I will be able to devote more of my time to bread and to sharing bread with you. That's my goal. But I don't know what will happen. You know, you just never know. If you told me 2 years ago I would be doing this, I would be like, what? Another question is, how many bread fails do you have before you share the recipe? When I bake with sourdough, most of the time, it works out. I have my base recipe, like you'll see it over and over in my videos. It's the same ratios. I keep that. And I add things, I change the flour, I'll change like one thing, like maybe it's the flour, maybe it's adding an inclusion, maybe it's adding more water, but like just change one thing, not all the things at once. And my success rate for that is like 100%, like it just works, which is great. I love it. Or like, I don't know, maybe it's not 100%. I call it a success if it tastes good. So it's not always beautiful, but like it pretty much always tastes really good. I found baking with yeast, I find it so much harder, and I have a lot more practices before I get one that I'm really happy with. They're just, yeah, they take me so many more attempts to get a good loaf, which is kind of ironic because everyone's like sourdough is so hard. But like I said before, I think if you have a good starter, it's actually hard to make a bad tasting loaf of bread. Another question is about my pets. I have a dog, his name's Sammy, and he's actually my partner's dog. That was another question. Like, who do you live with? I live with my partner, so it's the two of us. The cat is mine, Benny. They get along really well. It makes me so happy every time I see them like sitting together. I'm just like, Benny is a Devon Rex and Sammy is a Cocker Spaniel. I love them. Oh yeah, I love this question. What's your favourite memory you have with your cat? My favourite memory, I remember when I very first got Benny, the breeder had actually named him Itty Bitty because he was so tiny and he like nearly died when he was little and she had to hand feed him and everything. So he was so small when I got him. He was like this big. And I have this really vivid memory of him just like eating an entire can of tuna, and he was just like, the tin was like bigger than his head, like he was so small, and he was just like if you hear sometimes in the videos that I post, there's this like tap 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 tap, that's Sammy. He always comes whenever I get the bread board out, the cutting board out, or he hears the knife or anything like that, he's there. A lot of you were asking, where are your ovens? They came, don't worry. So this is the lounge room, complete with plants. This is my bread room. This is where I make all the videos on my laptop. And this is also where I send off all your books. I love this window. It's one of my favourite things. It made me choose the house. This is the kitchen. I put a step here for Benny because he wants to get on the counter but he can't jump. So he just jumps onto my back like a koala. This is the oven that I don't like. This is the garden. And the best thing about my house is this lemon tree, and we have a Hills hoist. It makes me feel very Australian. But we have like a kind of excited to try this. It's like a wood-fired barbecue. Like maybe I can make pizza on it. More plants. I have lots.